Welcome to this comprehensive journey through the history of Japan. Over the next hour, we will travel through time, exploring the remarkable story of a nation that has captivated the world with its unique culture, dramatic transformations, and enduring spirit. From the earliest human settlements on these volcanic islands to the technological powerhouse of today, Japan's history spans tens of thousands of years. It is a story of isolation and connection, of tradition and innovation, of devastating wars and extraordinary peace. We will meet emperors and shoguns, samurai warriors and court poets, reformers and revolutionaries. We will witness the rise of one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations and follow its journey through triumph and tragedy to the present day. This is the story of Japan. Chapter 1: The Dawn of Japanese Civilization. Long before written records captured the stories of emperors and warriors, the islands that would become Japan emerged from the vast Pacific Ocean. The Japanese archipelago stretches in a graceful arc along the eastern edge of Asia. It comprises 4 main islands: Honshu, the largest; Hokkaido, pronounced Hokkaido, in the north; Kyushu, in the south; and Shikoku, pronounced Ku, the smallest of the 4. Along with these major landmasses, thousands of smaller islands dot the surrounding seas. This unique geography would prove crucial to Japanese history. Separated from the Asian mainland by treacherous waters, Japan remained distinct from its neighbors. Yet it was close enough to receive cultural influences that would shape its civilization. The earliest human inhabitants arrived on these islands approximately 30,000 years ago. This was during the Paleolithic period, when lower sea levels created land bridges connecting Japan to the Asian continent. These ancient peoples were hunter-gatherers. They followed migrating animals across the landscape. They foraged for wild plants in the dense forests that covered the mountainous terrain. These first Japanese left behind stone tools and the faint traces of their campsites. These artifacts are silent witnesses to lives lived in harmony with the natural world. We know little about their beliefs, their social structures, or their daily experiences. But we know they survived and thrived in a challenging environment. Around 14,000 years ago, a remarkable transformation began. The people of Japan entered what archaeologists call the Jomon period, pronounced Mon. This name comes from the distinctive cord-marked patterns pressed into their pottery. The word Jomon literally means cord-marked or cord-patterned. These Jomon people created some of the oldest pottery in human history. Their ceramic traditions predated those of many other civilizations around the world. Long before pottery appeared in Europe or the Middle East, the people of Japan were crafting elaborate vessels from clay. Their pottery served practical purposes. They used it for cooking food and storing supplies. But these vessels also reveal an artistic sensibility and cultural sophistication. The elaborate decorations suggest that beauty mattered to these ancient people. Their pottery challenges simple notions of what prehistoric life was like. The Jomon people were not mere wanderers. They established semi-permanent settlements along the coasts and in forested valleys. They harvested shellfish from coastal waters. They hunted deer and wild boar in the forests. They gathered nuts, berries, and edible plants according to the seasons. Their society endured for over 10,000 years. This is an almost unimaginable span of cultural continuity. For comparison, all of recorded human history spans only about 5,000 years. The Jomon way of life lasted twice that long. During these millennia, the Jomon people created clay figurines with mysterious purposes. Some scholars believe these figures had religious or spiritual significance. They built pit dwellings for shelter, digging into the earth and covering the structures with thatch. They developed complex spiritual beliefs centered on the natural world around them. Everything changed around 300 years before the Common Era. New peoples began arriving from the Korean peninsula and mainland China. These migrants brought with them revolutionary technologies that would transform Japanese society. Most importantly, they introduced wet rice agriculture. This farming technique allowed for the cultivation of rice paddies in the fertile lowlands. Rice would become far more than a food source. It would become the foundation of economy, culture, and social organization for centuries to come. Alongside rice cultivation came the knowledge of bronze and iron working. For the first time, the people of Japan could create metal tools and weapons. These were far superior to the stone implements of earlier generations. Bronze bells and mirrors became objects of ritual significance. Iron tools made farming more efficient. Iron weapons made warfare more deadly. This era is known as the Yayoi period, pronounced Yayoi. It witnessed the gradual displacement or absorption of Jomon culture. The new agricultural way of life spread across the islands, transforming society in its wake. The introduction of rice farming created surplus food. This surplus allowed for population growth. It also enabled the emergence of social hierarchies. Some individuals and families accumulated more wealth and power than others. Distinct social classes began to form. Villages grew into larger communities. These communities began to compete with one another for resources and territory. The seeds of the Japanese state were being planted in the rice paddies of the Yayoi period. Chapter 2: The Rise of Imperial Japan and Classical Culture. As the centuries passed, powerful clans emerged to dominate different regions of Japan. The Kofun period, pronounced Kofun, beginning around 300 of the Common Era, takes its name from the massive burial mounds constructed for deceased rulers. These kofun were engineering marvels. Some were shaped like keyholes when viewed from above. They contained treasures and artifacts meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife. The largest of these tombs rival the pyramids of Egypt in scale. They testify to the power and resources commanded by early Japanese rulers. Among the competing clans, one gradually rose to prominence. The Yamato, pronounced Yato, clan unified much of central Japan under their rule. They achieved this through military conquest, strategic marriages, and diplomatic skill. The Yamato claimed descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, pronounced Mate Rasu. This divine lineage legitimized their authority for generations. The imperial line they founded continues to this day. This makes it the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy in the world. The 6th century brought a transformative new influence to Japanese shores. Buddhism, pronounced which had originated in India and spread through China and Korea, was officially introduced to Japan around 538 of the Common Era. This new religion offered sophisticated philosophical teachings. It brought beautiful artistic traditions. It provided powerful rituals, that appealed to Japanese rulers seeking to strengthen their authority. Buddhism did not replace the indigenous Shinto, pronounced Shinto, beliefs. Rather, the two coexisted, beginning a pattern of religious harmony that would characterize Japanese spirituality. Prince Shotoku, pronounced Shotoku, who served as regent in the early 7th century, became one of the most influential figures in Japanese history. A devout Buddhist and admirer of Chinese civilization, Shotoku promoted the new religion throughout the court. He commissioned the construction of magnificent temples. He also created the 17-article constitution. This document established moral principles for government based on Buddhist and Confucian teachings. Though not a constitution in the modern sense, it represented an attempt to create a more centralized and ethical system of governance. The Taika reforms, pronounced Ika, of 645 marked another crucial step in the development of the Japanese state. Inspired by the powerful Tang dynasty in China, Japanese leaders restructured their government along Chinese models. They established a centralized bureaucracy. They implemented a system of land distribution. They created new administrative divisions. These reforms aimed to concentrate power in the hands of the emperor. They sought to reduce the independence of regional clans. Though the reality of Japanese politics would prove more complicated than these idealistic plans. In 710, the Imperial Court established Japan's first permanent capital at Nara, pronounced Nara. Previous capitals had moved with each new emperor. But Nara was built to last. It was modeled on the great Chinese capital of Chang'an. Grand Buddhist temples rose throughout the city. Monks wielded considerable political influence. It was during this Nara period that Japan's oldest written histories were compiled. The Kojiki, pronounced Ki, and Nihon Shoki, pronounced Nihonki, recorded ancient myths, legends, and historical accounts. They preserved stories of gods and emperors that had been passed down through oral tradition. Yet the power of Buddhist institutions at Nara eventually became a concern for the imperial court. In 794, Emperor Kanmu moved the capital to a new location. This city was called Heian-kyo, pronounced Heian-kyoch, meaning capital of peace and tranquility. This city would later become known as Kyoto. It would remain the imperial capital for over 1,000 years. The move marked the beginning of the Heian period, pronounced Heian. This era is often remembered as the golden age of Japanese classical culture. The Heian period witnessed an extraordinary flowering of art, literature, and refined court culture. The aristocrats of the imperial court developed elaborate aesthetic sensibilities. They valued beauty, elegance, and emotional sensitivity above all else. Poetry became an essential social skill. The ability to compose elegant verses could make or break a courtier's reputation. Men and women exchanged poems as a form of communication and courtship. A poorly chosen word or awkward phrase could end a promising relationship. The Japanese writing system evolved during this period. Simplified phonetic scripts called hiragana, pronounced hiragana, and katakana, pronounced katakana, developed alongside Chinese characters. These scripts allowed for more natural expression of the Japanese language. Among the literary masterpieces of this era, none surpasses The Tale of Genji. It was written by Lady Murasaki Shikibu, pronounced Murasaki-bu, around the year 1000. This remarkable work is often considered the world's first novel. It follows the life and romantic adventures of Prince Genji, an imperial son of extraordinary beauty and talent. Through its intricate plot and psychological depth, the tale captures the values, customs, and emotional landscape of Heian court life. Lady Murasaki and other women writers of the period produced some of Japan's greatest literature. Women were encouraged to write in the native Japanese script. Men focused on Chinese-style compositions. This division actually gave women greater freedom to express themselves in their own language. Political power during the Heian period gradually shifted away from the emperors themselves. The Fujiwara, pronounced Fujiwara, clan perfected a strategy of marrying their daughters to emperors. They then served as regents for the young sons born from these unions. Through this practice, the Fujiwara dominated court politics for generations. They wielded real power while emperors remained ceremonial figures. This pattern of power behind the throne would repeat itself throughout Japanese history. While the court pursued aesthetic refinements in Kyoto, a different kind of power was emerging in the provinces. Local landowners needed protection for their estates. They began employing professional warriors to defend their interests. These warriors would come to be known as samurai, pronounced sa-muri. They developed their own code of values. This code emphasized loyalty, martial skill, and honor. As the central government's control weakened, these provincial military forces grew stronger. The tensions between rival warrior clans finally erupted in the Genpei War, pronounced Pei. This conflict raged from 1180 to 1185. The Taira, and Minamoto, pronounced Mina, clans, both of which had imperial ancestry, fought for supremacy across Japan. The war ended with the decisive victory of the Minamoto. The elegant world of the Heian court gave way to a new age, an age dominated by warriors. Chapter 3: The Age of the Samurai. In 1185, Minamoto no Yoritomo established a new form of government. This government would define Japan for the next 7 centuries. Rather than ruling from Kyoto, he set up his headquarters in the eastern town of Kamakura, pronounced Kamakura. This location was far from the intrigues of the imperial court. This military government was called the shogunate, pronounced shogunate, or bakufu, pronounced fu. It held real political and military power. Meanwhile, the emperor in Kyoto retained symbolic and religious authority. This dual structure of government became a distinctive feature of Japanese political life. A powerless emperor coexisted with a powerful shogun. This arrangement would persist in various forms for centuries. The samurai who served the shogunate developed a distinctive culture and value system. They practiced martial arts with religious dedication. They trained in archery, swordsmanship, and horseback riding. Combat skills were not merely practical necessities, they were spiritual disciplines. Zen Buddhism, pronounced Zen Bodhism, introduced from China during this period, appealed strongly to warriors. It emphasized discipline, meditation, and direct experience of truth. The austere aesthetics of Zen influenced everything from garden design to the tea ceremony. These cultural forms remain associated with Japan to this day. The Kamakura period faced its greatest test when the Mongol Empire turned its attention to Japan. The Mongols had conquered much of Asia under Genghis Khan and his successors. Now they sought to add Japan to their vast domains. In 1274, a massive Mongol fleet carrying tens of thousands of soldiers invaded the island of Kyushu. The Japanese defenders fought bravely, but they were outmatched by Mongol tactics and technology. Just as defeat seemed certain, a powerful typhoon struck the invasion fleet. Many ships were destroyed. The Mongols were forced to withdraw. 7 years later, the Mongols returned with an even larger force. This may have been the largest naval invasion in history up to that time. Once again, Japanese warriors defended their shores with desperate courage, and once again, a devastating typhoon scattered and destroyed the Mongol fleet. The Japanese interpreted these storms as divine intervention. They called them kamikaze, pronounced kami-ka-ze, meaning divine wind. The belief that the gods protected Japan from foreign invasion would have profound consequences in later centuries. Though Japan had survived the Mongol threat, the cost of defense weakened the Kamakura shogunate. Warriors who had fought expected rewards. But the government had little to give them, since no territory had been conquered. Discontent grew. In 1333, the shogunate fell. Emperor Go-Daigo attempted to restore direct imperial rule, but his government proved ineffective. A new military strongman, Ashikaga Takauji Shigatauji, established a second shogunate. The Ashikaga shogunate, also known as the Muromachi shogunate, pronounced Muromachi, was headquartered in a district of Kyoto. It never achieved the firm control of its predecessor. Regional lords called daimyo, pronounced waimyo, grew increasingly independent. The central government's authority steadily eroded. Cultural life flourished nonetheless. No theatre, Prano-H, developed its distinctive masked performances. Ink painting reached new heights of refinement. Flower arranging became an art form. The tea ceremony evolved into a spiritual practice. These cultural achievements emerged even as political order crumbled. The fragile peace shattered completely with the Onin War, pronounced Onin. This conflict began in 1467 as a succession dispute. It escalated into a decade of devastating conflict. Much of Kyoto was reduced to ashes. The war's end brought no resolution, only exhaustion. Japan entered the Sengoku period, pronounced Sengoku, meaning the Warring States period. This was an era of nearly constant warfare. Daimyo across the country fought to expand their territories. The old order had collapsed. Ambitious men of humble origin could rise to power through military skill and cunning. Japan had entered its most violent and chaotic era. Into this chaos came new influences from abroad. In 1543, Portuguese traders arrived on Japanese shores. They brought with them a weapon that would transform warfare, the firearm. Japanese craftsmen quickly learned to manufacture these weapons. They were called Tanegashima, pronounced Tanega, after the island where they first appeared. Within decades, Japan possessed more guns than any country in Europe. The arquebus changed the nature of battle. It reduced the importance of traditional samurai skills. It favored commanders who could organize and supply large infantry forces. Warfare would never be the same. 6 years after the Portuguese traders came, Portuguese missionaries. Francis Xavier, pronounced Xavier, a Jesuit priest, arrived in 1549. He began preaching Christianity. The new religion found receptive audiences. particularly in southern Japan. Hundreds of thousands of Japanese converted over the following decades. Some daimyo embraced Christianity sincerely. Others saw advantages in cultivating relationships with European traders. For a time, it seemed possible that Japan might become a Christian nation. Chapter 4: Unification and the Great Peace. The century of warfare finally began to end when three remarkable leaders emerged to reunify Japan. The first was Oda Nobunaga, pronounced. He was a daimyo from central Japan who combined military genius with ruthless determination. Beginning in the 1560s, Nobunaga defeated rival after rival. He used innovative tactics and the effective deployment of firearms. At the Battle of Nagashino, pronounced Nashino, in 1575, his forces used rotating volleys of gunfire to devastate a cavalry charge. This battle demonstrated the new realities of warfare. Nobunaga was assassinated in 1582, but his work was continued by his most capable general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, pronounced Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi's rise was extraordinary. He came from humble peasant origins, yet he became the most powerful man in Japan. He completed the military unification of the country through a combination of military victories and diplomatic marriages. His ambitions then turned outward. He launched two massive invasions of Korea in 1592 and 1597. His ultimate goal was to conquer China itself. These campaigns brought immense suffering to Korea, but they ultimately failed. Hideyoshi died in 1598, with his dreams of continental empire unfulfilled. Hideyoshi also took decisive action against Christianity. He was concerned about the loyalty of Christian converts. He worried about the potential for European interference in Japanese affairs. He issued edicts expelling missionaries. He began persecuting Japanese Christians. This policy would intensify under his successors. After Hideyoshi's death, power was contested among his former allies. Tokugawa Ieyasu, pronounced Tokuga Ieyasu, was a patient and calculating daimyo. He had bided his time for decades. Now he emerged victorious at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. This decisive engagement established Tokugawa dominance. In 1603, Ieyasu received the title of shogun. He founded a dynasty that would rule Japan for over 250 years. The Tokugawa shogunate established its capital at Edo, Do. This was a small fishing village that would grow into a massive city. Today we know it as Tokyo. The new government implemented sophisticated systems to maintain control. They were determined to prevent the return of civil war. The Sankin Kotai system required all daimyo to spend alternate years residing in Edo. Their families remained there permanently. They were virtual hostages. This policy drained the resources of potential rivals. Daimyo had to maintain expensive residences in Edo. They had to pay for elaborate processions traveling to and from their domains. They had little money left for building armies. At the same time, the system stimulated economic development along the roads to the capital. Perhaps the most dramatic policy of the Tokugawa era was sakoku, pronounced saku, meaning the closed country. Beginning in the 1630s, the shogunate systematically cut Japan off from the outside world. Christianity was banned completely. Suspected Christians faced torture and execution. Thousands died for their faith. Foreign trade was severely restricted. Only Dutch and Chinese merchants were permitted to conduct limited commerce, and only through the single port of Nagasaki, pronounced Naga-ki. Japanese citizens were forbidden to leave the country. Those abroad were prohibited from returning. Japan would remain largely isolated from the world for over 2 centuries. Within this closed system, Japanese society achieved remarkable stability. The Edo period brought peace after generations of warfare. Population grew, the economy developed, culture flourished. A rigid class system divided society into 4 official categories. Samurai stood at the top. They were followed by farmers, who were honored for producing food. Next came artisans, who made useful goods. Merchants occupied the bottom, despite often being wealthy. In theory, movement between classes was forbidden, though reality proved more flexible than official ideology. Paradoxically, the merchants who occupied the lowest rung of the official hierarchy often became the wealthiest members of society. Samurai were forbidden from engaging in commerce. They were required to maintain expensive lifestyles. Many fell into debt to merchant creditors. The great cities of Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto became centers of vibrant urban culture. This culture was created largely by and for the merchant class. They had money to spend. They wanted entertainment. This urban culture produced distinctive art forms that remain celebrated today. Kabuki theater, featured elaborate costumes, dramatic poses, and stories of love and loyalty. It drew enthusiastic audiences from all social classes. Ukiyo-e, Brunei, woodblock prints depicted beautiful courtesans, famous actors, and landscapes. These prints created affordable art for common people. Artists like Hokusai, pronounced Hohosi, and Hiroshige, pronounced Shige, produced images that would later influence Western artists like Van Gogh and Monet. The haiku, poetry form, was refined by masters like Matsuo Basho. He elevated this brief verse form into a vehicle for profound insight. In just 17 syllables, haiku could capture a moment of beauty or truth. By 1720, Edo had grown to over 1 million inhabitants. This made it one of the largest cities in the world, larger than London, larger than Paris, a testament to the prosperity of the Tokugawa peace. Yet beneath the surface stability, tensions accumulated. The samurai class had no wars to fight. They struggled to find purpose. Many faced financial difficulties. Periodic famines caused widespread suffering in the countryside. And increasingly, educated Japanese became aware that the outside world was changing rapidly. Western nations were industrializing. They were building powerful navies. They were expanding their empires across the globe. Japan remained frozen in time. This could not last forever. Chapter 5. Revolution at the isolation of Japan ended abruptly in 1853. American Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Edo Bay with a squadron of steam-powered warships. The Japanese called these vessels the Black Ships. These ships represented military technology far beyond anything Japan possessed. They were powered by steam, not wind. They carried powerful cannons. They could not be stopped by any force Japan could muster. Perry carried a letter from the American president. It demanded that Japan open its ports to trade. It required Japan to provide supplies for American ships. Perry promised to return the following year for an answer. The implicit threat of his powerful fleet was unmistakable. The shogunate faced a challenge it could not meet militarily. Reluctantly, they agreed to American demands. The Convention of Kanagawa, in 1854 opened two ports to American ships. Over 2 centuries of isolation had ended. Similar treaties with other Western powers followed. These agreements were deeply unequal. They granted foreigners special privileges. They limited Japan's control over its own trade policies. They allowed Western nations to try their own citizens in their own courts, even for crimes committed in Japan. The humiliation of these unequal treaties sparked a political crisis. Many Japanese blamed the shogunate for national weakness, particularly young samurai from domains that had long resented Tokugawa rule. The slogan, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians," united those who sought change, though they disagreed about what form that change should take. After years of political turmoil and occasional violence, a coalition of reformers forced the last shogun to resign in 1868. The Meiji Restoration, pronounced Meiji, as this revolution came to be called, officially returned power to the emperor. He was a 15-year-old boy who took the reign name Meiji, meaning enlightened rule. In practice, power lay with the reformers who had engineered the revolution. They were mostly young samurai. They were determined to strengthen Japan against Western imperialism. Their solution was radical. Japan would transform itself by adopting Western technology, institutions, and even customs. The speed and scope of change during the Meiji era was breathtaking. The feudal class system was abolished. Samurai lost their privileged status. They lost the right to wear their swords. A modern conscript army replaced the old warrior class. The government sent missions abroad to study Western nations, most notably the Iwakura mission, pronounced of 1871 to 1873. This delegation spent nearly 2 years examining the institutions of America and Europe. What they learned was systematically applied to remake Japan. Industrialization proceeded rapidly. The government supported strategic industries like textiles, mining, and shipbuilding. Japan's first railway opened between Tokyo and Yokohama in 1872. Rail networks soon spread across the country. A modern education system was established. It aimed to create literate citizens and trained workers. The Meiji Constitution, pronounced Meiji, of 1889 created a constitutional monarchy. It established an elected parliament called the Diet, pronounced Dyet, though real power remained concentrated in the hands of a small group of leaders. Japan's new strength was soon tested in war. The First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895 pitted modernized Japanese forces against the declining Qing dynasty of China. Japan's decisive victory shocked the world. An Asian nation had defeated the great Chinese Empire. Japan gained territorial gains, including the island of Taiwan. The balance of power in East Asia had shifted. A decade later, Japan faced an even greater challenge. It went to war against Russia. Russia was one of the great European powers. It had one of the largest armies in the world. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 ended in another Japanese victory. This was the first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European power in a major war. Japan gained control of Korea. It established itself as the dominant power in Northeast Asia. The victory inspired colonized peoples across Asia and Africa. It demonstrated that Western dominance was not inevitable. If Japan could modernize and defeat a European empire, perhaps others could too. Japan's imperial ambitions continued to grow. Korea was formally annexed in 1910. This began 35 years of colonial rule. When World War I erupted in Europe, Japan joined the Allied side. It honored its alliance with Britain. It seized the opportunity to capture German territories in the Pacific and China. By the war's end, Japan had established itself as one of the world's great powers. It had a seat at the table of international diplomacy. It had an empire stretching across East Asia. The transformation from isolated feudal nation to modern imperial power had taken less than 50 years. Chapter 6: The Dark Valley and Defeat. The Taisho period, pronounced Guizhou, spanning from 1912 to 1926, brought a brief flowering of democratic politics and cultural experimentation. Political parties gained influence, labor movements organized, women began demanding greater rights. Western fashions, music, and ideas circulated freely in the cities. Some historians call this era Taisho democracy. It was a time when Japan seemed to be moving toward a more liberal political system. This hopeful trajectory was interrupted by disaster. The Great Kanto earthquake struck on September 1st, 1923. It devastated Tokyo and Yokohama. Fires swept through the wooden cities. Over 100,000 people perished. In the chaos that followed, false rumors spread. They blamed Korean residents for poisoning wells and setting fires. Mobs attacked Korean communities. Thousands of innocent people were massacred. This dark episode revealed the prejudices lurking beneath the surface of Japanese society. The 1930s brought economic depression and political extremism. Military officers grew frustrated. They saw corrupt civilian politicians. They saw Western-influenced decadence. They began taking matters into their own hands. Assassinations of moderate leaders became disturbingly common. The army gained increasing control over government policy. Japan was entering what would later be called the Dark Valley of militarism and war. In 1931, Japanese army officers in Manchuria, pronounced Manchur, staged an incident as a pretext for invasion. They then conquered the entire region without authorization from Tokyo. The government, faced with a fait accompli, accepted the conquest. They established the puppet state of Manchukuo, pronounced. When the League of Nations condemned the aggression, Japan simply withdrew from the organization. The path toward wider war was opening. Full-scale war with China began in 1937. It followed another staged incident near Beijing. Japanese forces quickly captured major Chinese cities, but China refused to surrender. The conflict became a brutal war of attrition. Atrocities committed by Japanese troops caused immense suffering. Most notoriously, the massacre at Nanjing, pronounced Nanjing, killed hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. These events would poison relations between the two nations for generations. As war in China continued, Japan's relations with Western powers deteriorated. The United States grew concerned about Japanese expansion. America imposed increasingly severe economic sanctions. These included an embargo on oil that threatened to cripple Japan's military. Japanese leaders faced a choice. They could abandon their imperial ambitions, or they could strike against the Western powers before their resources ran out. On December 7th, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. They destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet. They killed over 2,000 Americans. Simultaneous attacks struck British and Dutch colonies across Southeast Asia. Japan had chosen war with the world's greatest industrial powers. They gambled on a quick victory. They hoped to secure resources and defensive positions before American might could be mobilized. Initial Japanese conquests were spectacular. Within months, Japan had seized the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Burma. They created an empire that stretched across much of East Asia and the Pacific. Japanese propaganda proclaimed a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. It claimed Japan would free Asian peoples from Western colonialism. The reality of Japanese occupation often proved as harsh as or harsher than Western rule. The tide of war turned at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. American forces sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. From that point forward, Japan was on the defensive. They gradually lost territory as American forces island-hopped across the Pacific. Japanese soldiers fought with desperate courage, often to the last man. But they could not overcome American industrial superiority and technological advantages. By 1945, Japan's situation was hopeless. American bombers had reduced most major cities to ashes through conventional bombing raids. Naval blockade had cut off essential imports. Yet the military leadership refused to surrender. They prepared the civilian population for a final defense of the home islands. This defense would have cost millions of lives on both sides. The end came with terrible swiftness. On August 6, 1945, an American aircraft dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima, pronounced Hiroshima. Approximately 80,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die from radiation and injuries in the following months. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki, pronounced Nasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito, pronounced, broadcast a message to the Japanese people. He announced that Japan would accept the Allied terms of surrender. For most Japanese, this was the first time they had ever heard the Emperor's voice. The war was over. Chapter 7. Recovery and Renewal. The American occupation of Japan, led by General Douglas MacArthur, lasted from 1945 to 1952. During these years, Japan underwent another profound transformation. This time, it was imposed from outside. The occupation authorities were determined to demilitarize and democratize Japan. They wanted to ensure it could never again threaten international peace. A new constitution, drafted largely by American officials, came into effect in 1947. This document established Japan as a constitutional democracy. The emperor was reduced to a purely symbolic role. Most remarkably, Article 9 renounced war as a sovereign right. It prohibited the maintenance of military forces for warfare. This peace constitution reflected both American desires to neutralize Japan and genuine Japanese revulsion at the devastation war had brought. Other reforms reshaped Japanese society. Land reform broke up large estates. Agricultural land was redistributed to tenant farmers. This created a class of independent small farmers. Women gained the right to vote and legal equality with men. Labor unions were legalized and encouraged. The education system was reformed to promote democratic values. War criminals were tried and punished. though the emperor was shielded from prosecution. When the occupation ended in 1952, Japan faced an uncertain future. The country was still poor. Its cities still bore the scars of bombing. Its international reputation remained tarnished by wartime aggression. Yet within a remarkably short time, Japan would achieve an economic recovery so dramatic that it became known as a miracle. The Japanese economic miracle of the 1950s and 60s transformed a devastated nation into an industrial powerhouse. Government and business worked closely together. They targeted strategic industries for development. They protected domestic markets while aggressively pursuing exports. Japanese workers demonstrated extraordinary dedication and productivity. Many were employed by large corporations that offered lifetime employment and comprehensive benefits. This created a sense of loyalty and commitment that drove economic growth. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics served as Japan's symbolic return to the international community. The Games showcased a modern, peaceful, and prosperous Japan. New highways crisscrossed the cities. The famous Shinkansen, pronounced Shinkansen, bullet train connected Tokyo and Osaka. Gleaming stadiums hosted athletes from around the world. 4 years later, Japan's economy surpassed West Germany's. It became the second largest in the world, trailing only the United States. The oil crisis of 1973 posed a serious challenge. Japan imported virtually all of its petroleum. Japanese industry responded by developing more energy-efficient technologies. They shifted toward higher-value products that required less energy to produce. This adaptation proved remarkably successful. By the 1980s, Japanese automobiles and electronics dominated global markets. Brands like Toyota, Sony, and Honda became synonymous with quality and innovation. Japanese management techniques were studied and imitated around the world. The late 1980s brought a speculative bubble in real estate and stock prices. It seemed to promise limitless prosperity. Property values soared to absurd heights. The grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo were said to be worth more than all the real estate in California. When the bubble burst at the beginning of the 1990s, Japan entered a prolonged period of economic stagnation. It came to be called the Lost Decade, though the malaise would actually persist much longer. Growth rates that had once amazed the world fell to near zero. Deflation became a persistent problem. Natural disasters continued to test Japanese resilience. The Great Hanshin earthquake struck the city of Kobe, pronounced Kobe, in 1995. Over 6,000 people died. The destruction was enormous. The government response was widely criticized as slow and inadequate. Public confidence in institutions was shaken. 16 years later, an even greater catastrophe struck. On March 11, 2011, a massive earthquake and tsunami devastated the northeastern coast. Nearly 20,000 people died. Entire towns were swept away. The Fukushima, pronounced Fu, nuclear power plant suffered meltdowns. Radioactive contamination spread across a wide area. Hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated. The disaster raised profound questions about energy policy and nuclear safety. Contemporary Japan faces challenges that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations. The population is aging rapidly. Japan has one of the highest proportions of elderly citizens in the world. Meanwhile, birth rates have fallen far below replacement level. The working-age population is shrinking. This creates labor shortages. It strains pension and healthcare systems. Immigration, long resisted in this historically homogeneous society, has become increasingly necessary, but it remains controversial. Conclusion: Japan endures. Yet Japan endures, as it has endured through centuries of change and challenge. The nation that emerged from prehistoric mists to create one of the world's great civilizations continues to evolve. It adapts to new circumstances while maintaining connections to its rich cultural heritage. From the cord-marked pottery of the Jomon people to the high-technology innovations of today, from the elegant poetry of the Heian court to the global reach of contemporary Japanese popular culture, the story of Japan remains one of humanity's most remarkable journeys. Japan has shown an extraordinary capacity for transformation. It absorbed Buddhism from China and made it distinctly Japanese. It adopted Western technology and institutions while preserving its cultural identity. It rebuilt from the ashes of war to become an economic superpower. The challenges ahead are significant: an aging society, economic stagnation, natural disasters, regional tensions. But Japan has faced existential challenges before: the Mongol invasions, the arrival of Perry's black ships, the devastation of World War II. Each time, Japan has found ways to adapt, to transform, to endure. The story of Japan is not finished. New chapters are being written every day, by the young people of Tokyo and Osaka, by the farmers of rural villages, by the scientists and artists and entrepreneurs who are shaping Japan's future. What remains constant is the spirit of a people who have always found beauty in impermanence, who have built and rebuilt their wooden temples for centuries, who have turned the challenges of their island geography into sources of strength. This has been the history of Japan, a story of islands and emperors, of warriors and poets, of isolation and connection, of destruction and renewal. A story that continues. Thank you for listening.